My name is Sloane Whitaker. I'm 32 years old, and I hold the rank of Lieutenant Commander in the United States Navy. Today, I'm standing in Portsmouth Circuit Court, not as an officer, as a defendant. The plaintiffs? The same parents who haven't called me in 12 years. My father Walter lets out a short, ugly My mother Diane shakes her head, whispering something to their lawyer about how my dress blues look like a costume for a funeral. They are suing me, trying to take the farmhouse my grandfather left me, claiming abandonment. Abandonment. I just got back from a 9-month deployment. My left shoulder still aches where a piece of shrapnel found me over open water. And this filing calls me an irresponsible daughter. You think that uniform is going to scare anybody? My father had snarled at me in the hallway outside the courtroom. They think they dragged me here to humiliate me. They don't know that I came here to finally introduce myself. If you've ever had your own family deny your every effort, call you a disappointment simply because you chose a different path, let me know where you're watching from. Hit the like button and get ready for a story about the price of honor. The diner off Route 17 smelled like America. Burnt coffee, sizzling bacon, maple syrup gone slightly too sweet from sitting too long on a warm griddle. I sat in a cracked red vinyl booth under a fluorescent light that hummed a tune of comforting normalcy. This was my tradition. Coming home, truly coming home, meant black coffee and a slice of toast with peanut butter and a spoon of wild honey. It was the first meal I always ate on American soil. A small ritual to wash the dust of faraway places off my hands. My grandfather used to make it for me on Saturday mornings when I was a girl. Peanut butter, wild honey from the hives behind his barn, toasted just past golden. He called it aviator's breakfast, though back then I didn't know I'd grow up to actually fly. My left shoulder sent a dull ache down through my arm as I reached for the coffee cup, a permanent souvenir from a stretch of open water off the coast where things had gone very wrong, very fast. I was bone tired. The kind of exhaustion that settles into your marrow after 9 months of carrier decks, cramped berthing racks, and the vibrating shell of an MH-60 Seahawk. But I was home. You sure you don't want syrup with that, hon? The waitress asked, holding up a sticky bottle. I managed a tired smile. No thanks, the peanut butter's all I need. My phone buzzed against the tabletop, a low vibration that cut through the diner noise. I glanced down. An email from a law firm I'd never heard of, Pruitt and Finch. The subject line was cold and impersonal. Case file 4238B. Immediate response required. 28T. Pruitt 9 cents required. Spam, I thought. Some kind of phishing attempt. My thumb hovered over the delete icon, but some ingrained sense of duty made me open it instead. As the document loaded, the cheerful noise of the diner seemed to recede, stretching and fading until there was only a dull ringing in my ears. The filing was dense with dry legal language that felt almost alien. But 2 names jumped off the page, stark against the white background. Plaintiffs, Walter and Diane Whitaker. Defendant, Lieutenant Commander Sloane Whitaker. My heart didn't race. It stopped for one long silent beat. I forgot how to breathe. I scanned the page, my eyes tripping over the words, petition for partition of real property due to dereliction of duty and abandonment by the defendant. Abandonment. It was repeated 3 times on the first page alone, a legal hammer striking the same bruised spot over and over. They claimed I had abandoned my grandfather's farmhouse, that I had failed my responsibilities as the heir. I stared down at my toast, forgotten now, the honey starting to crystallize on the cold plate. Abandoned. For the last 9 months, my world had been the gray steel of a destroyer and the churn of rotor blades over black water. I hadn't abandoned anything. I was serving my country. The property taxes were deducted automatically from my Navy pay every single year, like clockwork. The new roof I'd arranged 2 years ago paid in full. The burst pipe last winter, fixed within 48 hours by a property manager I trusted. I let out a short laugh, with no humor in it at all. It was the laugh of someone who'd just been told the real war was waiting for her back home. The waitress glanced over, concern and confusion crossing her face. I flew MH-60 Seahawks out of a squadron that specialized in search and rescue and combat support. 9 months of it behind me now. Most of it spent flying off the back of a destroyer somewhere I couldn't name to people who weren't cleared to hear it. It was not glamorous work most days. It was long hours in a cramped cockpit, checklists and weather calls, and the particular boredom of watching gray water for hours that occasionally, without warning, turned into the most important 90 seconds of somebody's life. I had learned over 10 years of it that the job rarely announced itself. It just arrived, and you either knew your aircraft and your training well enough to meet it, or you didn't. I shook my head at my own thoughts and found my brother's contact, Colton. The golden child, the one who stayed in Portsmouth, who sold insurance downtown, who never disappointed anybody. He picked up on the third ring. Sloane. Long time. His voice was flat, laced with the casual indifference of a man merely inconvenienced by a phone call. Colton. Mom and Dad are suing me, I said, the words feeling like gravel in my mouth. Over Grandpa's farm. A pause, not a shocked one, a knowing one. Yeah, I heard about it, he finally said. He'd known, and he hadn't called. Look, he went on, they're just saying you never come home, that the place is falling apart. Besides, they need the money. I need the money too, honestly. You should just do the right thing and let it go. He never asked if I was okay. He never asked about the deployment. He never asked if I'd come home safe. The casual cruelty of it landed sharper than any piece of shrapnel ever had. The right thing? I whispered. Yeah, the right thing, he repeated, like he was explaining something to a child. Goodbye, Colton. I ended the call before he could answer. His betrayal hurt worse than the lawsuit. It confirmed the truth I'd spent 12 years trying to outrun. I was, in every way that mattered to that family, alone. I remembered the day I'd enlisted 12 years ago. My father, a man whose hands were permanently stained with motor oil, whose entire worldview had been forged over an engine block, hadn't even looked at me. He just stood at his workbench and refused to acknowledge the daughter who, in his eyes, had shamed him by choosing something he couldn't control. My mother sent me a single text message the week I graduated flight school. We raised a daughter, not a soldier. Don't embarrass this family. 12 years. Not one phone call on Christmas, not one card on my birthday. When I was laid up in a Navy medical center recovering from surgery after a piece of anti-aircraft shrapnel tore through my shoulder during an extraction mission, they didn't call. They didn't text. They sued. This wasn't a spontaneous act of anger. It was a calculated strike. They wanted the last thing that connected me to my grandfather, the only person in that family who had ever truly seen me. And it was more than the house. They wanted to erase my legacy, and in doing so, erase me. Grandpa Frank's farm wasn't a piece of property to me. It was a sanctuary. He'd built it himself, board by board, with the same steady hands that had served aboard a destroyer in the Pacific during World War II. A small, honest house nestled among tall Virginia pines, smelling of sawdust, pipe tobacco, and the quiet dignity of a man who understood the world in a way my own father never would. I was 10 years old, sitting beside him on the porch swing on a warm summer evening, cicadas buzzing their relentless song in the trees, when he pulled a small heavy object from his shirt pocket and pressed it into my palm. His old Navy-issue compass, brass casing, worn smooth from decades of use. This world's gonna try to make you lose your way, Sloane girl, he said, his rough hand closing over mine. They'll tell you you're not fast enough, not smart enough, not ladylike enough. He gave me a slow wink. None of that matters. All you need to know is your true north, your honor. That's the one direction that never, ever changes. Don't you let anybody else tell you who you are. He never told me to act like a lady. He never flinched when I came home with skinned knees and a triumphant grin. He saw the fire in me not as something to be extinguished, but as a strength to be honed. He saw me. My father saw things differently. To him, the world was a collection of tools and problems. Things were either useful or they were in the way. People were much different. When I was 17, I made the all-district swim team. My father never came to a single meet. Waste of gas, he'd mutter, wiping grease off his hands with a rag. During districts, I hit the wall wrong on a flip turn and dislocated my shoulder. The same shoulder, though I didn't know it then, that would carry a piece of shrapnel 15 years later. My first thought wasn't the pain. It was cold dread about what my father would say. At the hospital, his first reaction wasn't concern. It was contempt. He looked at the sling on my arm and sneered. Told you so. Now you're useless for a season. Who's gonna want a girl who can't even swim straight? My mother stood beside him, silent. Her silence was always her answer. a quiet endorsement of every judgment he handed down. I drove myself home that day, and I paid the ER copay myself with money I'd saved scooping ice cream all summer. That sling wasn't just fabric and foam. It was a monument to the fact that in my own family, I was on my own. That truth deepened every year with the favoritism shown to my brother. When Colton turned 18, he got drunk with friends and wrapped the brand new pickup my parents had bought him around a guardrail and picked up a DUI in the process. My father yelled at the responding officer for scratching the paint on the wreck, then went out the following week and bought Colton another truck, a nicer one, to fix the problem, he'd said. A few months later, when I turned 18 and wanted to attend a summer program that prepared students for a shot at the Naval Academy, my father laughed, a short, dismissive bark. "No money for that nonsense," he said, not even looking up from the engine he had his head buried in. I worked a second job waiting tables that summer to pay for it myself. It was never about the money, it was about worth. A daily unspoken declaration that my ambitions were frivolous while my brother's mistakes were investments. I wasn't worth as much as he was in that house, not even close. There was another memory that surfaced that day in the diner, one I usually kept locked away. I was 19, home on leave for the first time since boot camp, standing in my father's garage in my dress uniform because I'd wanted, just once, to see if it changed anything. A few of his friends from the volunteer fire department were there, beers in hand, ribbing him about something on the lift. One of them, a big man named Dwayne, had nodded at me and said, only half joking, "Your girl's really out there playing Army, huh, Walt? Bet that's a real comfort to you." The other men had laughed. My father hadn't defended me. He'd laughed along with them, a short, humorless bark, and changed the subject to carburetors. I'd stood there in that uniform, 20 feet from the man who raised me, and understood for the first time that his anger toward me wasn't really about me at all. It was about how small he felt every time someone reminded him his daughter had gone and done something he never had the nerve to try. He came home that night and slammed cabinet doors for an hour over nothing. I didn't understand it then. I understood it now. Men like my father didn't know how to carry pride. They hadn't earned themselves, so they buried it under contempt instead. It didn't excuse what he did, but it explained it, and somehow the explanation was almost sadder than the cruelty itself. So when Grandpa Frank passed, I wasn't surprised by what happened next. I was in the middle of flight school and wasn't granted leave for the funeral. The one phone call I received from my parents during that entire stretch wasn't to offer comfort. It was to deliver a verdict. "The old man went crazy," my father's voice crackled over the line. "Left you the farm." He was furious. My mother was audibly sighing in the background. They saw it as a foolish old man's whim. I understood it perfectly. In his final act of love, Grandpa Frank knew they would never value me. He knew they'd see my path as a dead end, so he gave me a place to come back to. A true north. A legacy. And now they wanted to take that too. There was one more memory of him I carried, one I hadn't told anyone, not even Priya. The week before I left for boot camp, Grandpa Frank had driven me to the bus station himself, because my father refused, and my mother said she had a headache. We sat in his old truck in the parking lot for 20 minutes before I had to go inside, neither of us saying much, the radio playing low. Finally, he'd reached over and squeezed my hand, the same rough hand that had once closed the compass into my palm on that porch swing. "You're going to have days out there when you wonder if any of this was worth it," he said. "Days when you're tired down to the bone and nobody back home understands what you gave up to be there. On those days, I want you to remember something. It was never about what they understood. It was about who you decided to become when nobody was watching to make sure you did it right." He'd nodded toward the bus idling at the curb. "Go on now, make your own name. Nobody else is going to hand it to you, and you don't need them to." I hadn't cried in that parking lot. I'd saved it for the bus. 3 states later, when the adrenaline finally wore off, and the reality of what I'd just done settled into my chest. But I never forgot the drive, or the squeeze of his hand, or the fact that he was the only person in 18 years who had ever treated my choices as brave instead of foolish. If you've ever had one person in your life who believed in you when no one else would, please support this story with a like. And in the comments, type the word Grandpa or Grandma, or whoever that person was for you. Let's fill this comment section with their memory. This isn't about a house, this is about honor, and I was not going to let them take it from me. Not now, not ever. A few days before the hearing, another email arrived from Pruitt, the family's attorney. Subject line, settlement offer. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. It wasn't an offer. It was an ultimatum dressed in polite legal language. Miss My. Whitaker agrees to relinquish all claims to the property. In exchange, Mr. and Mrs. Walter Whitaker agree not to pursue further claims for damages resulting from her irresponsibility. Ms. Whitaker. The formal address was a deliberate sting, a way to remind me that I was, in their eyes, an outsider now. But it was the word irresponsibility that made blood pound in my temples. They wanted me to sign a document that legally branded me irresponsible, a written confession to a crime I hadn't committed. This wasn't about the house anymore. This was about submission. They wanted a victory on paper they could wave around town, proof that the rebellious daughter had finally been broken. My finger hovered over the reply button. A storm of angry words swirled behind my eyes. I didn't type a single one. I moved the cursor to the trash icon instead. This wasn't going to be won with angry words. It was going to be decided face to face, under oath, in a courtroom. I called Priya that night. Lieutenant Priya Nakamura and I had gone through flight physicals together a decade ago before she cross-decked into the Judge Advocate General's Corps. She was the sharpest legal mind I knew, and the only person outside my squadron I trusted with something this personal. "You don't need me standing next to you," she said after I read her the filing over the phone. "But you sure as hell need a map before you walk into that courtroom alone. Send me everything. Every receipt, every tax record, every invoice. If you're doing this pro se, we build you a case so clean it embarrasses their attorney." We spent 2 nights going through 12 years of paperwork by video call. Property tax statements, a roofing invoice from 2021, an emergency plumbing repair from the winter before last that I'd arranged through Eleanor Combs, the property manager I'd hired years ago to check on the place while I was deployed. Eleanor had kept meticulous records, dated photographs, receipts, a logbook of every visit, even a note about the day she'd found a tree limb down across the driveway after a storm and paid a neighbor's kid $40 to clear it so the mail could get through. "This is good," Priya said, scanning the binder we'd assembled. "This is really good, Sloane. Judges in property disputes want dates, dollar amounts, and paper trails, not feelings. You've given them a wall of both." She flipped another page, then looked up at me over the screen. "But I want to be honest with you about something. Paperwork wins a property case. It's not going to fix 12 years. She paused. "Are you ready for that part too?" I didn't have an answer for her. "Not yet. You don't have to forgive anybody tomorrow," she said, more gently. "You just have to tell the truth and let the truth do its job. That's the only strategy that's ever worked for people like us, Sloane. We don't win rooms by being loud. We win them by being accurate." She closed the laptop folder on her end. "Get some sleep if you can, and wear the blues, not because it'll scare them, because it's true." I thought about that long after he hung up. The idea that a uniform could be a form of testimony all by itself before a single word was spoken. The night before the hearing, I didn't stay at my apartment in Norfolk. The walls felt like they were closing in. Instead, I drove out to the farm. The gravel driveway crunched under my tires, and the house rose up, dark and silent under the moonlight, a silhouette of memory against a starry Virginia sky. It was cold inside, carrying the damp sleeping smell of a place that had gone too long without a fire in the hearth. I didn't bother with the lights. I went straight to the porch, my grandfather's porch, and sat on the top step. My old shepherd mix chief padded out after me and rested his graying head on my aching shoulder, letting out a soft The silence out here was different from the silence of my apartment. Deeper. Filled with crickets and the weight of the coming day. Tomorrow I would walk into a courtroom and face my own parents as adversaries. I had my evidence organized. I had my uniform pressed. I had my strategy. But I wasn't prepared for this feeling, a profound sense of being orphaned, even though they were both alive, just a few miles down the road. Chief whined low in his chest as if he could sense the turmoil in me. I buried my face in the fur at his neck. "It's just you and me, old boy," I whispered into his coat. "Just you and me." That's when my phone lit up, not a lawyer. Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Reyes, the biggest, steadiest man in my squadron, and the closest thing I had to a brother, boss. "Heard you got some family trouble." A tired smile touched my lips. "News in a Navy squadron travels faster than weather," I typed back. "Just a little hometown drama. Handling it." His reply came instantly. Roger that. Crew sends its best. Need us to come pay anybody a visit? My mother-in-law's terrified of me. I let out a genuine swallowed by the dark. The image of Reyes, 6'4" and built like a doorframe, showing up on my father's porch was both terrifying and hilarious. A second message followed, a video file. I hesitated a second before opening it. The screen flickered to life. A cramped ready room somewhere overseas. Crowded in front of the camera were 6 familiar faces, exhausted, windburned, grinning wide. "Hey, boss!" they yelled, a chaotic, overlapping chorus. "Heard you're going home to kick some ass in court." Reyes filled the frame. "Seriously, ma'am, don't let him push you around. You're the toughest pilot in the squadron, hands down." A young rescue swimmer named Delgado pushed into view. "Ma'am, if you need a character witness, I will personally tell that judge about the time you flew us through a wall of weather nobody else would touch." The clip cut off, the connection dying somewhere over the ocean between us. The screen went black, but the image of their grinning, loyal faces stayed burned behind my eyes. I sat on that cold step and felt warmth spread through my chest anyway. A tear slid down my cheek. Then another. Not sadness. Gratitude. These men had seen me at my absolute worst. Soaked, exhausted, making split-second calls with lives in the balance. They trusted me. And here they were, half a world away, taking 5 minutes to remind me I wasn't fighting alone. My blood family hadn't called in 12 years. My chosen family had reached out inside of 12 hours. Family isn't only the blood you're born into, it's the people you're willing to bleed for. I thought about the first time I'd met Reyes. A green ensign fresh out of flight school, standing next to a chief petty officer twice her flight hours who could have made her life miserable, and instead spent 6 months quietly teaching her everything the manual left out. I thought about Delgado, who'd once held pressure on my forearm after a training mishap and talked to me about his daughter's soccer games the entire helicopter ride back, so I'd have something to focus on besides the pain. These men had not chosen me because we shared blood. They had chosen me, over and over, in small, unglamorous ways, because trust is a decision people make about each other every single day, and mine had never once let them down. I understood, sitting on that step with a dead phone screen in my hand, that the same was true in reverse. I had never let them down, and they had never let me down, and somewhere along the way that had become its own kind of family, sturdier than the one I'd been born into. I took a deep breath, the cold night air clearing my head. I was not an orphan. I stood, patted Chief's solid head. "Come on, boy. Big day tomorrow." Portsmouth Circuit Court, Courtroom 4, was a small, airless box that smelled of old paper and floor wax. Dark wood paneling seemed to swallow the light. The moment I pushed open the heavy doors, a wave of silence rolled over the gallery. Every head turned. My dress blues, the deep navy wool, the sharp creases, the gleaming gold buttons seemed to soak up all the sound and oxygen in the room. Across the aisle sat my parents, a united front of accusation, beside their attorney. My father was crammed into his one good suit, tight across shoulders built by decades at a workbench, making him look rigid and uncomfortable. He met my gaze, and a cruel smirk twisted across his mouth before he let out a short, not humor, contempt on public display. My mother refused to look at me at all, smoothing the fabric of her Sunday dress. As I passed their row, I heard her whisper to their attorney, "It's ridiculous. She always has to make a scene." That whisper struck harder than I expected. The same tone she'd used my whole life, the one that always asked, without asking, "Why can't you just be what we wanted?" I walked to the defendant's table, sat, and placed a single neat binder in front of me. Their attorney, Gerald Pruitt, a portly man with an oily, condescending voice, rose to address the bench. The judge, a weary-looking man named Harlan Voss who looked like he presided over every conceivable variety of family misery, adjusted his glasses. "Your Honor," Pruitt began, his voice a smooth performance of sympathy, "we're here today to address a deeply painful family matter. The defendant, Lieutenant Commander Sloane Whitaker, he let my rank hang in the air like an accusation, chose to abandon her family 12 years ago in pursuit of a transient, dangerous career that has, shall we say, alienated her from her most basic filial responsibilities. She willfully abandoned the property left to her by her beloved grandfather, allowing it to fall into a state of shameful neglect, causing my clients immeasurable emotional and financial distress. The performance was too much for my father. He shot to his feet, the chair scraping loud against the floor. "She ran off to play soldier," he roared, jabbing a grease-stained finger at me. That's all it ever was. A game. You think that costume's gonna scare anybody? You're no daughter of mine. Mr. Whitaker, you will sit down and remain silent, or I will have you removed. Judge Voss's voice cracked through the room like a whip. My father sank back into his seat, muttering. Pruitt didn't miss a beat. "As you can see, Your Honor, emotions are running high. Mrs. Whitaker, would you take the stand?" My mother rose slowly, dabbing at dry eyes with a folded tissue. She sat, arranged her skirt, and began to weep on cue. Delicate, practiced sobs. "I tried," she said, voice cracking beautifully. "I prayed every night she'd come home and just be a normal girl, find a nice young man, settle down, give me grandchildren. But the military changed her, made her hard, cold. She's not my little girl anymore. She's a stranger." "In your opinion, Mrs. Whitaker," Pruitt said gently, "did your daughter abandon the house?" My mother lifted her eyes, glistening with manufactured tears, looking everywhere but at me. "Yes," she said, her voice a pained whisper that carried to every corner of the room. "She abandoned it, just like she abandoned us. She never comes home for Christmas. She didn't even call when her father was sick with pneumonia last year. We could have been on our deathbeds and she wouldn't have known." I sat perfectly still, hands clasped on the table. That lie stung worst of all. I remembered that call vividly, made from a secure line during a workup exercise, my voice raw with exhaustion. I had called. She hadn't picked up. This was their strategy. A public execution of my character, one carefully aimed word at a time. Abandoned, not my daughter. Cold. Stranger. My training kicked in, a calm, cold voice cutting through the noise. Observe. Analyze. Act. I focused on my breathing. I pictured Reyes's grin. I felt the phantom weight of my grandfather's compass. I kept my eyes on the flag in the corner of the room, my anchor in the storm. Finally, Pruitt turned to the bench. "The plaintiff's rest, Your Honor." A thick silence fell. Judge Boss adjusted his glasses and turned his full attention to me. "Defendant," he said, voice flat and tired. "Do you wish to respond? Do you have counsel present?" I took a slow, deliberate breath, the way I'd been trained. Then I rose. Every whisper in the gallery died. "I do not require counsel, Your Honor," I said, my voice calm and steady, the same voice I used to project commands over the noise of a spinning rotor. And yes, I would very much like to respond. They had made their appeal to pity. I would make my appeal to the facts. "For the record," I began, "my name is Lieutenant Commander Sloane Whitaker, United States Navy." I let the rank sit a beat, a quiet rebuttal to my father's sneering costume comment. "I do not play soldier, as the plaintiff alleges. I serve." From the corner of my eye, I saw my father snort. I refused to look his way. His power to diminish me with a single glance ended today. Regarding the abandonment claim, I lifted the binder from the table and walked it to the clerk's desk, setting it down with a solid, definitive thud. "I submit into evidence 12 years of property tax records for my grandfather's farm. Every payment made in full and on time, direct debited from my active duty salary. Also in that folder, a fully paid invoice for a roof replacement I arranged in 2021 and an emergency plumbing repair from the winter before last. Both coordinated remotely, one through a satellite call from a forward staging area. I am not at liberty to describe the other through a licensed property manager, Mrs. Eleanor Combs, whose signed statement and dated inspection photographs are also included." I paused, letting the paper trail of 12 years of quiet responsibility sink into the room. "I may not have been physically present at that property, Your Honor. My duties often prevent that, but I have never, not for a single day, abandoned my responsibility to it, just as I have never abandoned my responsibility to this country." I turned my head toward my mother. She flinched, wide-eyed, as though surprised I would dare look at her directly. "My mother is correct about one thing," I said. A flicker of triumphant confusion crossed her face. She thought I was conceding. I let her hold that small victory for exactly one beat before I took it away. "I was not home when my father was sick. I was not home for Christmas 2 years ago. On that Christmas, Your Honor, my crew and I were flying search and rescue coverage off the coast during a live operation. And last spring, when my father had pneumonia, I was a patient at a Navy medical center, recovering from surgery after a piece of anti-aircraft shrapnel tore through my shoulder during an extraction mission. A low murmur moved through the gallery. I did, however, call. I called my mother from my hospital bed. She didn't pick up. I let the silence stretch. Then, quietly, perhaps she didn't recognize the number. The color drained from my mother's face. Her carefully built facade didn't crack. It disintegrated. Her mouth fell open. Her eyes, no longer wet with performance, were wide with the stark terror of being caught in an undeniable lie. She knew. I knew. She knew. Your Honor, I concluded, my voice even and unyielding. The truth is, I never abandoned that house, just as I never abandoned this family. The truth is, they abandoned me. 12 years ago, on the day I swore an oath to serve this country instead of staying to work in my father's garage. They are not suing me today over a house. They are suing me because they are ashamed of a life they never bothered to understand. But the final truth, Your Honor, is that I am not ashamed of who I am. If you believe that speaking your truth, even when your voice shakes, is its own form of strength, hit that like button, and in the comments below type the words "I see you" for Sloane. And for everyone who's ever had to fight to be seen. I gave the judge a slight nod, turned, and sat back down. The room was utterly, profoundly silent. The silence that followed was different from any that had come before. Not the absence of noise, a heavy, expectant void. Judge Boss said nothing for a long moment. He leaned back, removed his glasses, and began polishing the lenses with a small cloth from his breast pocket. A slow, deliberate gesture, the kind of motion a man makes when he's turning something over carefully in his mind. My parents and their attorney exchanged confused, anxious glances. This wasn't going according to their script. They'd expected tears, drama. They hadn't expected the cold, quiet weight of facts. Finally, Judge Voss put his glasses back on. He looked directly at me, and something had shifted behind his eyes. The bureaucratic weariness was gone, replaced by a sharp, personal focus. "Lieutenant Commander," he said, his voice a low baritone that seemed to make the air vibrate. "What's your platform?" "MH-60 Seahawk, Your Honor. Helicopter C Combat Squadron. I'm not at liberty to discuss operational specifics." "I'm not asking for operational specifics, Commander." His gaze dropped to the ribbons on my chest, trained by a past none of us in that room had known about until this moment, and read them not as decoration, but as language. I served 11 years myself, before law school. Surface warfare, back when the Spruance-class destroyers were still in commission. A faint, private, that third ribbon from the top. That's an air medal with combat distinguishing device, isn't it? I was so startled by the question, I could only manage a quiet "yes, sir." At the plaintiff's table, I heard my father whisper harshly to my mother, "What the hell's an air medal?" She only shook her head, face a mask of confusion. Judge Voss ignored them entirely, leaning forward, elbows on the bench. "Forgive my memory, Commander, it's been a couple years, but would you be the same Sloane Whitaker who flew the extraction of 43 American civilians off that embassy compound during the evacuation 3 years back? The pilot who took a shrapnel hit to the shoulder going back for the last 2 staffers on the ground?" The air in the room seemed to crystallize. Every sound stopped. The shuffling of feet, the rustle of paper. You could have heard a pin drop on the worn carpet. I looked across at my parents. My mother's mouth hung open, lipstick suddenly garish against her pale skin. My father was frozen, the angry red drained from his face, replaced by a ghastly shock. This story was a ghost to them. A headline they might have glanced at once, a segment they'd ignored on the evening news. They had never asked. They had never known. I remembered that night with a clarity I usually kept sealed away in the same part of my mind where I kept the sound that aircraft made when the round found us. We'd been holding a hover at low altitude over the compound while a crowd pressed against the perimeter fence. The noise of it, a physical thing you could feel in your teeth. 43 names on a manifest, and 2 of them still inside when the fence gave way. I remembered Delgado's voice in my headset, tight and controlled, calling out obstacles as I fought the aircraft sideways through smoke. I remembered the jolt when the shrapnel came through the airframe, the way the whole cockpit smelled suddenly of copper and burnt plastic, and the strange, distant calm that settled over me anyway because there was no room left in my head for anything but the next 3 seconds. I remembered setting the aircraft down one final time on a strip of cracked asphalt that shouldn't have held our weight, and the 2 staffers running low and fast toward the open door. And the moment the wheels finally left the ground for good, I did not remember deciding to be brave. I only remember doing the job in front of me, the way I'd been trained to, the way my grandfather had trained ship's crews to do a lifetime before I was born. Bravery, I had learned, was rarely a feeling. Usually it was just duty, wearing a louder name. I couldn't find my voice for a second. The sudden public acknowledgement of the single most defining day of my career, spoken aloud in this stuffy little room, was disorienting. I was just doing my job, Your Honor, I finally managed. I read about it when it happened, Judge Boss went on, quieter now, almost to himself. There was a piece in the paper, 3 paragraphs, page 6, buried behind a story about a zoning dispute. I remember thinking, somewhere out there is a family who has no idea what their kid just did. He shook his head slowly. I didn't know, sitting here this morning, that I'd found that family. A small, sad smile touched the corner of his mouth. The first warmth I'd seen from him all day. Commander, that is one hell of an understatement. Then he turned. He physically rotated his chair to face my parents, and the warmth vanished, replaced by something cold and hard. Mr. and Mrs. Whitaker. His voice was dangerously quiet. You have brought a petition before this court accusing your daughter of abandoning a piece of property. He picked up the binder without looking down, held it up. It appears that while she was busy making certain its taxes were paid on time, she was also, concurrently, busy saving the lives of 43 Americans, people who could have been your neighbors, your friends. He let the binder drop to the bench with a loud, echoing smack that made both my parents jump. While you were busy being ashamed of her, the rest of this country owes her a debt of gratitude. He wasn't finished. He fixed his gaze on my father. Mr. Whitaker, let me be perfectly clear. Your daughter is a hero, an actual, real American hero. A lot of people in this country talk about service. We fly flags on the 4th of July. We thank a veteran at the grocery store. Your daughter has lived it. She has bled for it. A short, sharp gesture toward my shoulder. And you stand in this courtroom and call it playing soldier. My father's face, pale with shock, began to redden again. But this time it wasn't anger. It was the flush of profound public shame. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Judge Voss turned to Pruitt, who suddenly looked like he wanted the floor to open beneath him. Counselor, do you have anything at all to say for your client's conduct? Your Honor, Pruitt stammered, shuffling papers he wasn't reading. My clients weren't aware of the specifics of their daughter's service. The judge's voice rose. They weren't aware. And why weren't they aware, Counselor? Because they never asked. Because they were so consumed with their own wounded pride that they couldn't be bothered to find out their daughter was risking her life on the other side of the world for the very freedoms that let them stand in this courtroom and insult her. He stopped, breathing heavily, then sat back, smoothed his robe, and became a judge once more, voice returning to calm authority. Under the statutes of the Commonwealth of Virginia, a claim of property abandonment requires proof of complete and utter neglect, coupled with clear intent to relinquish all responsibility. The defendant has provided uncontested evidence of continuous financial upkeep, maintenance, and responsibility for the property in question, corroborated by a licensed property manager's sworn statement and 12 consecutive years of tax records. There is no legal basis whatsoever for this claim, and frankly, Counselor, I am surprised it was ever filed. Pruitt said nothing. There was nothing left to say. He reached for his gavel. The petition brought by the plaintiffs, he declared, is hereby dismissed. Crack. The sound was sharp and absolute. Furthermore, he added, I find this action was filed with vexatious intent for the primary purpose of harassment, pursuant to Virginia Code Section 8-01271. 1. The court orders that all of the defendant's reasonable costs associated with this matter, though she appears to have had the good sense not to require formal representation, shall be borne in full by the plaintiffs. He looked at me, the steel in his eyes softening for a moment. A slow, respectful nod. Thank you for your service, Commander. And with that, he rose and swept out of the courtroom through a side door, leaving stunned silence behind him. For a full second, nobody moved. Then the spell broke. My father let out a strangled, incoherent roar and slammed his fist against the bench in front of him. My mother finally broke down completely, shoulders shaking with ragged, genuine sobs, not the practiced tears from the stand, the bitter, ugly kind that come with real defeat. They had lost. And they had been stripped bare in front of a room that would talk about this for months. I watched him for a moment, and a strange thing happened. I didn't feel victorious. The word that came to mind was tired. I just felt tired and hollow, the crushing weight I'd carried for 12 years suddenly gone, lifted by a stranger's gavel, leaving a quiet ache where the burden used to sit. I stood, smoothed the front of my jacket, and walked out of the courtroom without a single backward glance. I didn't go back to my apartment. I drove straight to the farm, the silence in my truck a stark contrast to the emotional detonation I'd just witnessed. I didn't change out of uniform. I walked to the back porch and sat on the steps, the dark wool heavy and formal in the quiet country air, and watched the sun drop behind the tall pines, painting the sky orange and violet. Chief came and laid his head on my lap. I had won. The verdict was absolute. So why did I feel so hollow? The gavel had shattered 12 years of accusation, but it couldn't magically heal what sat underneath. Sitting there in the quiet, I understood something. I had never actually wanted to humiliate them. I had never wanted to see them exposed and broken in a public courtroom. All I had ever wanted was for them to see me, the person I'd become, not the disappointment they'd imagined. For 12 years, I'd carried the weight of their misunderstanding on long deployments, on night flights, on the lonely decks of ships halfway around the world. It was a burden I'd grown so used to that I barely knew who I was without it. A few days passed. I spent them at the farm, reclaiming the space, physically and otherwise. I pulled weeds from my grandmother's old flower beds, hands raw from stubborn roots, mindless, physical, a way to sweat the tension out. I was wrestling a patch of ivy when the sound of an engine made me look up. My mother's car, pulling slowly into the driveway, the first time she'd set foot on this property in years. She got out and stood there a moment, looking not at me, but at the house itself. She looked older than I remembered, smaller. The defiance from the courtroom had been replaced by a deep, weary sadness. "It looks better," she said quietly. "You've been working on it." I didn't answer, kept my hands in the dirt. She took a few tentative steps closer and held something out. An old photograph, corners soft and curling, colors faded to warm sepia. A picture of me, maybe 5 years old, perched on my grandfather's shoulders, my face split by a wide, toothy grin. He was looking up at me, an expression of pure, unadulterated pride on his face. "He would have been so proud of you, Sloane," my mother said, barely above a whisper. I still didn't look up. "Your father, he was just scared. You went to all those places. He was terrified of losing you." For a man like him, that fear just turns into anger. It's the only way he knows how to feel anything at all. Finally, I looked up, meeting her gaze. "Why are you telling me this now?" Her eyes, for the first time, looked haunted because of what happened in that courtroom. The judge? He was right. We didn't know. We didn't know because we never asked. She took a shaking breath, like the admission cost her something. "Your father." After the news covered that embassy story, he found the footage online. He watched it over and over. He never told anyone. Not even me. I only found out because I saw it in his search history. My heart skipped a beat. All this time he'd known. He'd seen the proof of my life's work, and his stubborn pride wouldn't let him acknowledge it even to himself. A secret kept locked away. A silent, solitary act of watching the daughter he pretended not to have. "What do you want, Mom?" I asked, my voice flat. I needed to cut through years of excuses. She looked at me, truly looked this time. "This Sunday," she said, the words coming in a rush. "Come for dinner. I'll make your favorite, fried chicken." I just stared at her. The idea was so absurd, so jarringly normal after years of bitter estrangement. "I don't know," I said, giving nothing away. "Please, Sloane." And for the first time, I heard a crack in her composure, genuine desperation. "Your father, he'll be there. He agreed." The first olive branch offered in 12 years of frozen silence. I looked at her, and I no longer saw a monster. I saw a tired, frightened woman who had spent a lifetime standing with her husband even when he was wrong, following him down a road of anger and resentment, and now finding herself alone at a dead end, trying to find her way back. "I'll think about it," I said. As she got back in her car and drove away, I already knew I would go. That Sunday, I drove to the small house I grew up in, a knot of apprehension tightening in my stomach. I'd taken enemy fire with less anxiety than this, but it was a different kind of courage. The courage to be vulnerable, to accept what I couldn't change, and find the strength to change what I could. I didn't choose my dress blues that morning. I didn't reach for civilian clothes either. I put on my service khakis, the standard everyday uniform. It wasn't a declaration of war the way the blues had been. It wasn't a retreat into anonymity either. It was a quiet statement of fact. This is who I am, every single day. This is simply me. I knocked before I could lose my nerve. My mother opened the door with a nervous smile. Stepping inside, the smell of fried chicken and buttermilk biscuits filled the air, the smell of 1,000 Sunday dinners from a lifetime ago. My father stood awkwardly by the stove, out of place in his own kitchen. He looked up as I entered, eyes flicking over the khaki uniform. For a moment, I saw the old hardness in his face. Then something shifted. A short, almost imperceptible nod. "Come on in," he said. Voice a low grumble. Chicken's almost ready. The air was thick with 12 years of unspoken words, but it wasn't hostile anymore. Just awkward. And for the first time, awkward felt like progress. We ate in near silence, the only sound the clink of forks against plates. Not comfortable, but a start. A shared meal. A truce declared over mashed potatoes. After dinner, while I was helping my mother clear the table, my father spoke from the doorway. "Sloane, come out to the back porch a minute." My mother froze, looking between us, worried. I gave her a small nod and followed him outside. We stood in the fading evening light, cool against my skin. For a long moment we just listened to the cicadas, the same sound I remembered from my grandfather's porch. "You did good," he finally mumbled, not looking at me, staring out at the yard instead. "In court. I just told the truth, Dad," he grunted, then reached into his jeans pocket and fumbled with something. He pulled his hand out and held an object toward me, small, heavy, brass casing dulled with age. My breath caught. My grandfather's personal compass, not the one he'd given me, his own. The one he'd carried in his pocket every single day, the one my father had kept for himself after he died. "He left this for me," my father said, voice thick. "But I think it belongs to you now." He pushed it into my hand. "You earned it more than I did." I closed my fingers around the compass, its familiar weight solid in my palm. This wasn't an apology. He would probably go to his grave without ever saying those words out loud. But this surrender of a family heirloom, this admission of worth, was more powerful than any apology could have been. I opened the brass lid. Inside, inscribed by hand, were my grandfather's words. "Honor is the one direction that never changes." I looked up at my father. He finally met my gaze, and in his eyes I saw not anger, but a deep, weary regret. He reached out an awkward, hesitant hand and placed it on my shoulder, the one that still ached sometimes when the weather turned. His hand was heavy, calloused, faintly smelling of motor oil. The first time he'd touched me in kindness since I was a little girl. "Don't be gone so long next time," he said gruffly. That was it, not forgiveness, not a magical healing of every wound. Something smaller, and maybe more real. Acceptance. The war was over. A long, cold truce had begun. Over the next few shore leaves, I worked on the farm, repaired the porch swing, planted a new garden, gave the whole house a fresh coat of paint. On weekends, my father drove out to help. He never said much. He'd just show up with his toolbox, and we'd work side by side in a quiet, comfortable rhythm. Then one Saturday, Colton showed up too, awkward, out of place. He picked up a paintbrush and got to work without a word about the lawsuit. We didn't talk about Yemen, or the courtroom, or the 12 years. We just painted the two of us moving down opposite ends of the same wall until we met in the middle. The way we used to when we were kids, splitting chores in the same house before either of us knew what it meant to disappoint anyone. Near the end of the afternoon, he set his brush down on the lip of the can and stood there for a second looking at the trim he'd just finished like he was working up to something. "I should have called you back," he said finally, not looking at me. "That day, in the diner, when you told me they were suing you. I should have said something different." "Yeah," I said. "You should have." He nodded, accepting that without arguing, which surprised me more than an apology would have. "I was scared of them too, you know. Just in a different way than you were. You left. I stayed and learned how to agree with everything so nobody ever looked at me twice." He picked the brush back up. "That's its own kind of running, I guess, just slower." I didn't have a neat answer for that. I only nodded, and we kept painting until the light went gold and then gray, and my mother called us in for dinner. We ate dinner together on that freshly painted porch, the three of us, and for the first time in over a decade, it felt something like family again. My story got out, the way these things do in a small town. I was invited to speak at my old high school for Veterans Day. I stood on that stage in uniform and talked to a room full of teenagers about honor, about service, about finding your own true north. Afterward, a girl in the back row waited until the gym had mostly cleared before she came up to me. She was maybe 16, standing with the particular stiffness of somebody who'd been rehearsing a question the whole assembly and still wasn't sure she'd get it out right. "My family doesn't really get why I want to enlist either," she said. "They keep telling me to pick something safer, something they can explain to people." I thought about my father at his workbench, refusing to look at me the day I signed my papers. I thought about the compass in my pocket. "You don't owe anybody an explanation for the size of your own life," I told her. "You just owe yourself the courage to live it honestly. The rest of them will catch up or they won't. Either way, that's on them, not you." She nodded slowly, like she was filing the words away somewhere she could find them later, and walked out into the parking lot where her mother was waiting in an idling car. I watched her go and thought, not for the first time, that maybe the whole point of surviving something like this was to make it a little easier for the next person standing where you used to stand. That night, back on the porch at the farm, I held the compass in my hand. Beneath my grandfather's timeless inscription, I carefully engraved a new line, a lesson learned in the crucible of my own life. Forgiveness is the truest form of discipline. I had found my direction. I had come home. Some nights when the farm is quiet and Chief has already claimed his spot at the foot of the bed, I take the compass out and just hold it, feeling the same worn brass my grandfather carried through a war, and my father carried through his own quieter one, and I carry now through whatever comes next. It doesn't point toward forgiveness exactly. It doesn't point toward forgiveness exactly. It just points toward honesty, toward showing up every single time as exactly who you are, and letting that be enough, whether or not the people you love are ready to see it yet. That was the whole lesson in the end. Not that courtrooms fix families. They don't. Only truth does that, slowly, one Sunday dinner at a time. Thank you for walking this path with me. My story isn't just about the family you're born into. It's about the honor you build for yourself. It's about finding your own true north, even when the world tries hard to convince you that you're lost. In the comments below, I'd be honored if you shared one word that represents your true north: family, honor, peace, freedom, whatever it is for you. If stories about resilience and the courage to define your own worth matter to you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. You are not alone on your journey.